next, we're very pleased to have someone who is very familiar to many of you who have followed Zoetis. Tim Bettington is our next speaker, and he'll be joining us online. His role is Executive Vice President and President of U.S. Operations and Global Customer Experience with Zoetis. Tim leads the company's U.S. commercial operations, supporting its livestock and companion animal portfolios. Additionally, he leads the global customer experience function, where he leverages his extensive expertise in the worldwide animal health industry. A native of Australia, over the course of his 20-plus years in animal health, he's held senior positions with both Boehringer Ingelheim and Novartis. No stranger to the Midwest. When we visited with him not too long ago, he was in Great Bend, Kansas, traveling around, visiting with lots of feedlots and customers. So please help me welcome Tim Bettington.
Thank you, Sarah. Great to be here with you, Senator Moran, Senate Secretary Vilsack, and others. Yes, I was in Kansas a couple of weeks ago, visiting with a few feedlot producers. And while I'm not in Kansas City in person today, I always appreciate spending time with the ag community whenever I can. I've always appreciated spending time with this community, whether in my home country in Australia, where my family is still very active in the farming industry, or here in the US, where I've lived for the last 15 years, and 8 of those 15 years, so more than half my time in the United States has been in Kansas City itself. I'll do a quick introduction of Zoetis for those that aren't familiar, and then I will, hopefully we can then jump into the discussion. So for those of you that don't know Zoetis, I'll give you a brief background. I was hopefully going to share some slides, but I'm currently blocked from that, so I'll just talk through it quickly. So Zoetis is the largest animal health company in the world. For those of you that don't know us, we're guided by a singular purpose as an animal health company, and only an animal health company. We strive every day to nurture the world and humankind by advancing care for animals, including pets and food-producing animals. We're headquartered in New Jersey, which is where I'm based today, and we are the largest animal health company in the world, as I mentioned. Many of our locations are in the Midwest, including our global research and development headquarters in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We have a large facility in Charles City, Iowa, which is a vaccine plant. We have a facility in Lincoln, Nebraska, also just outside Chicago, and we've got a very large several large distribution centers in Kansas City itself. So we provide vaccines, medicines, diagnostics, genomic testing, and precision livestock farming applications, and we serve veterinarians and pet owners, as well as producers of beef, dairy, pork, poultry, and fish. And 44% of our global business today is generated from the livestock industry. At Zoetis, we believe healthier livestock are more sustainable. To help our customers be more productive, we are using our expertise in animal health to bring livestock farmers and ranchers products and services that can improve the health and well-being for their animals. So America's farmers and ranchers have done a tremendous job in recent years to be more effective and productive. And I know they're constantly under pressure to do more with less, which is what we're going to talk about today. And technology and innovation will help us continue to improve here and meet our consumers' expectations. So that's a brief overview of Zoetis. And with that, Sarah, let me turn it back to you to get the discussion started.
Okay, thank you, Tim. And as I mentioned, please feel free to submit your questions electronically on Slido, and we will, I'll start by asking a few questions. You have to keep in mind I'm a journalist. I can just keep talking. If you don't submit any of your own questions, we won't have time for those, so please do so. But Tim, I'd like to relay something that Senator Moran said, and that is just the importance of NBAF, the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility. Can you share with us a little bit what this means for Zoetis and more widely the animal health industry to have this new facility?
Sure. So NBAF is a great opportunity for not only the Midwest, but for the U.S. as a whole. So emerging infectious disease area is a huge area of concern for all involved. And having been involved with FMD for a period of time, and now as we get closer to, hopefully not, but African swine fever getting closer and closer to our door, the work that's done at NBAF and around these facilities are critically important. And the reason I say that is, this is the facility that are working on these very challenging diseases that we have, both not only just zoonotic but others. We have a great ongoing relationship with the government, and we work very closely and continue to work closely around foot and mouth disease and also African swine fever. But we have a very strong commitment to advancing animal health and protecting public health from threats posed by these emerging and infectious diseases, and the relationship with NBAF is key. One thing that I will say is important within that is, the work that those in Plum Island have done for many, many years has been critical in preparing the US for any potential threats to emerging diseases. And I think as that work continues and shifts to NBAF, I think that's going to be very powerful moving forward. But we expect to do a lot of work with NBAF in the coming years.
So in our conversation about your tours of feedlots around Kansas, and I'm sure in other areas when you've been out into the country, tell us just a little bit about some of the things you're hearing, both good and bad. I mean, what are the challenges people are surfacing for the animal health industry and for those who are producers on the ground trying to make a living?
Sure. I was just in Kansas the week before that. I was in eastern Idaho just visiting some dairy farmers, and much like the survey that was just posed, labor, taxes, and trade, everywhere I went was quite eye-opening. And having been involved in the agricultural industry for some time, going back probably a decade, there was plenty of workers available for the industry, and that's dwindled over time to the point where even last week, 2 weeks ago when I was out there, we had the challenge of the crew that we were processing animals with was the day release crew from the local prison. So obviously labor is the key challenge that we're continuing to work towards. So anything that we can do and others can do towards impacting that in a positive way is a good thing, because labor is going to be the ongoing challenge for some time. And obviously when you get, as Senator Moran said, when you get out into those smaller communities, it's agriculture is the lifeblood of those communities. So labor certainly for me is the one that stood out, and anything that anyone can do to improve that, whether it's through efficiency or gains or whatever we can do, is critically important. I would also like to come back to NBAF just quickly. One thing I will say is people focus on a few key diseases that Plum Island / NBAF continues to work on. One thing that we do, and we work very closely with them, that we're watching roughly around 200 diseases that have been identified by WHO. And so the level of detail that they're going into well beyond diseases that aren't in this country is critically important. So I think I'm really excited about the new facility in Manhattan, because I think it's going to be a huge step forward from the current facility they have.
So I remember when you were talking about the prisoners who are working in the feedlots, that was the first I had heard about that. And is that just a Kansas thing? Did you run into that in Idaho as well?
I didn't run into it in Idaho, but what I did run into in Idaho, which was really interesting, is talking to a number of large dairy producers that were milking, 45, 50, 70,000 cows. And what they were saying is, through that time, they'd done a lot of work with their employees to try and get them, finding ways to keep them to stay, providing education for them, offering to pay for them to go to college, do other things as an incentive to get them to stay. One thing that they did do, though, is we did several sessions with them around the workers' skill sets and knowledge themselves, and kind of some sessions around giving like a disc profile, if you like. And many of the owners said, we're now transitioning many of our traditional Hispanic workers into very senior leadership positions, which wasn't happening a decade ago. So that's been a big transition, and the importance of them and all the newer employees and ability to speak Spanish to be able to communicate well is an ongoing challenge and issue. But it was great to see those Hispanic employees be promoted and become senior leaders in those large dairies. So, which was a big shift for me.
So one of the other things that I don't think we normally think about as a challenge for the livestock industry, but you have surfaced this before, is just the lack of broadband and how it really is a limiting factor for so many folks. Can you expound on that a little bit more?
Sure. So there's been quite a lot of work done, obviously, around what's loosely termed precision agriculture, right? And so it's heavily done on the crop side. The animal side is a little bit behind, but as we try to expand some of those things, and one of the number one challenges is I can pick on dairies because it's a great example. When you have dairies where the animals go outside, suddenly you do a lot of work and you have collars and everything all over the animals, and you generate a lot of information, how long they're feeding for, how long they're lying down for, what their temperature is. Great information around animals so you can identify sick animals much faster. But as soon as they walk out of the barn, out into the pasture, you lose the signal and you lose the connectivity. So you're not getting the full value of the technology that's available. So how do we improve that, and how do we improve the ability for ranchers and farmers around the country to input information and to generate more information on the animals to help identify sick animals faster and improve the overall herd health? So ourselves at Zoetis, I mean, we've been very proud to support the American Connection Project Broadband Coalition, which is more than 150 companies have joined. But this is a big issue for us because we see a lot of challenges moving forward in agriculture where there's going to be a need for a much greater broadband than there is today to really improve efficiency, because technology is going to have to play a big role in the labor shortage that was brought up earlier. So I think if we're not able to achieve this, that'll just compound problems. So it's broadband is very critical for all farmers and ranchers for us, and something we're going out of our lane a little bit to support because we know it's a positive impact on agriculture.
It's certainly something we hear across both livestock and crop producers. We are starting to get some questions in from the audience now, so thank you very much for submitting those. One of our questionnaires wants to have you address country of origin tracking and how that might impact, and not just country, but I mean, as you referenced, trying to track an animal outside of the barn. I mean, how is this going to overall impact the industry?
I mean, traceability is a topic that the industry has debated for a very long time, for as long as I've been involved in the agricultural industry. And I think ultimately it's something that I think is going to be important. But the challenge with many elements of traceability today is it's an additional cost to the livestock industry, and is there a benefit to them at the end of the day? So I think we're seeing consumers demand more information, require more information, and I think traceability is now a goal that I think is somewhat achievable down the road. I think we're not completely there yet, but there seems to be more and more interest in getting to a common goal of traceability. And I think if we can do that, that would be very helpful. Now, technology will play a big role in that, obviously, because there's going to be lots of scanning and tagging, etc. But I think as technology improves, that will become much easier to do. Country of origin labeling, I think there's a healthy debate around that still. But I think traceability as a whole, as a topic, is, we believe, something very important and critical for the industry long term, and I think would really help change some of the perception. So I'm a great example, right? Lived all my life in rural Australia, rural America, and now I live in New Jersey. And where I go and where I visit here in the Northeast is very different to the rest of the world that I've lived in. And people's perception of agriculture, rightly or wrongly, is very different. So I work very hard in trying to educate them, but I can't get to all of them. There's too many of them. So anything to improve that, and traceability is something that comes up increasingly, and we could really benefit from.
So you referenced that NBAF is looking at a really wide array of potential diseases. Are there any that maybe aren't on the tip of our tongues now that we should have on our radar?
Good question. I would say, I mean, there's some traditional ones that people continue to work with. We continue to work with. We work closely with NBAF on. Obviously, foot and mouth disease is still one of the bigger ones. African swine fever is obviously the tip of everyone's tongue today. There's still a lot of other things that are still are actively being worked on, things that people don't pay as much attention to: avian influenza, rabies, Lyme disease, West Nile virus, other things there's treatments for today, but still could be improved. So there's a lot of things that maybe people think might have fallen off the radar that are still actively being worked on. The big ones, to your point, ASF and FMD are still the big drivers of I think what's happening. There's others, but I think ASF getting as close as the Dominican Republic has really got people's attention and very active and aggressively working towards a solution, because there isn't a global solution today.
So one of our questioners want to know how far out we are on getting an African swine fever vaccine. Are we talking, a few more years, or what's on your crystal ball for having one of those that's effective? So
African swine fever has been in Europe for some time, and there is no effective solution today. So it's obviously not a quick fix. It's obviously not an easy thing. It could take up to 3 more years to develop an active solution. Some of it will depend on will there be emergency use vaccines available or not. I would say, based on recent precedents, you would think potentially that could be the case. So as long as the government is very active and willing to work with companies to do so in partnerships, and many of our active work is in partnerships with the likes of NBAF. So that's, but it could take up to 3 years, but I think in an emergency use it could be shorter than that.
All right, thank you. We had some discussions last week about global commitments to reduce methane. One of our questioners wants to know, what do you see as the prospects for feed additives that could reduce methane emissions?
I think that's a great question, and I think a little bit of somewhat of the holy grail for something that can reduce methane emissions. And I think that could potentially be the next wave of significant livestock innovation if we're able to get to that point. And we've been working quite actively with a group in New Zealand around doing some work there, and it's been quite fruitful to this point. But it's still very early. But I think it may not be feed products, but there is a lot of active work around methane emissions and around the world, and it's seen as a very high priority, much higher priority than obviously it was some years ago. And there's some quite interesting research coming out today, and I think that's something that you probably won't see in the next year or two, but in the medium term, I think you'll see a lot of companies very active. Some of our competitors have done some work already in that area, and will continue to work in that space. But yeah, and we're also continuing to work with. We've got a partnership with Colorado State University Research Innovation Center that we do a lot of work with, and we have a transboundary disease center there that we work with, that we're doing some work with as well, on top of the work that we're doing in New Zealand, which is focused in sheep, but there's a lot of work being done around the world in different areas. But I think that will be the next opportunity for us in the medium term for growth as an industry.
Well, and certainly we know that some seed companies are working on producing feed that will actually be a big part of the solution as well. So a lot of innovation around that. Can you elaborate just a little bit more about what do you see as the innovations in addition to focusing on methane reduction and methane emission reductions? What else is kind of on the horizon that we should be looking forward at?
Yeah, I mean, the livestock industry from an innovation perspective, obviously, doing more with less is kind of the key when we think about sustainability, and what we're trying to do as an industry is from a sustainability perspective. So anything that can help people achieve their sustainability goals is going to be important. So, anything that is being worked on today that can improve, increase productivity, reducing carbon emissions, water use, labor, and support the responsible use of antibiotics is kind of actively being worked on. So I would say many of the areas, there's still some traditional research areas going on, but there's a bit of a breakaway increasingly into not just the NBAF type world and transboundary diseases, but also into this methane emission, which is new and wasn't happening from our industry a decade ago at all. So I think there's a bit of an evolution, as many of the diseases today are pretty much they need some improvements, but they're working. The health and quality of the animals coming out of the United States is the best in the world when you compare output and productivity. So it's hard to say there's huge needs, but there is some challenges. But labour continues to be one, methane emissions continues to be one, and so they're two big areas that companies are actively working on to try and improve the sustainability of our farmers and ranchers.
So obviously we've got some university folks here that are training our next generation of workers and trying to make sure that the labor force is up to speed on all these issues. Any kinds of advice that you might have for what else can be done either through community colleges or technical schools or four-year universities to try to get more folks into the animal health industry and providing that next generation of labor?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have a crystal ball and see that. One thing I would say is increasingly one challenge that we see in agriculture today is many companies are trying to do things on their own. Methane emissions is a good example. Labor shortage is an example where companies are trying to come up with their own solutions. I think broadband's probably the best example where you're seeing 150 companies come together and provide input and guidance and financial support to improving that. So I think partnerships are going to be the key moving forward. I don't see companies like us doing everything on its own anymore. I see increased use of partnerships and engagement where we might bring some science, somebody else might bring the technology, and somebody else might be involved, and there could be 3 or 4 companies in a collaboration that drive success. But I see increasing partnerships moving forward. And so anything to do around that from a university or college perspective, openness to either A, getting funding from outside, and B, taking the funding that we have and saying, who can we bring together to come out with the best output and outcome to help? Because funding will be a challenge, I think, for agriculture moving forward. To your point on labour and getting people out into the increasingly, some of the towns that you go to visit that are the Great Bend, Kansas, great example, that are the heartbeat of agriculture. It's tough, and those towns aren't necessarily growing. So anything to do to attract any industry at all to bring more people, because many years worked in different parts of the world, and as we used to say, if you bring somebody with them if they have a trailing spouse, as we used to call them, and that were always equally as educated but didn't have a job in that town, they would always find a job, create an environment, create an opportunity. So even if you can bring any technology in, the rest of the people that come with those employees will bring value to those communities. So keep finding things. It might not be directly into agriculture. It could be in manufacturing, could be in something else, but it will bring opportunities and bring industry to your towns and communities. So think very openly and broader than we've had to historically on how to bring things to communities. I grew up in one of those communities, and I still visit it a lot, and it's a challenge all over the world. So.
It sounds like you're making a case for more of a holistic approach to job creation, and that is you need to have the infrastructure not only for a trailing spouse or, childcare availability, healthcare is big, so having maybe more of a regional approach to bringing those assets into rural communities.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's absolutely spot on.
And it also sounds like there's still, this is something we've been writing about for a long time, still a shortage of vets that are willing to work at large animal clinics.
Well, I think there's a shortage of vets in general. There's also a shortage of vet techs in general, so which is a challenge, large animal in particular. And obviously, people are increasingly going through vet school and moving into more of a small animal focus. But I think there's a number of initiatives and a number of sponsorships in particular. Companies such as ourselves, we have a number of veterinarians we sponsor every year, and one of the goals is you can take our sponsorship, but you have to go into large animal practice. So, we're all trying to drive people down that large animal route because, K-State is a great example where there's a lot of vets come out into large animal practice, but it's, we need to keep that going. So,
thanks. appreciate all the questions still coming in. This one's focused on how is Zoetis responding to the new regulation on over-the-counter medications being labeled for prescription use?
In terms of how we're responding, we're responding by following the guidelines and recommendations, and it's something that was expected to be coming, and we're adapting to that. But we've had to spend a lot of time with a number of our producers to make sure that they're aware of it, understand it, and there is alternatives for them. So,
thank you. One of the other questions is just really about supply chain. You heard Senator Moran talk about this. We know a lot of folks are having problems getting either key ingredients or getting computer chips, a lot of different things along these different supply chains that make modern agriculture possible. Can you share with us just a little bit about what, if any, supply chain disruptions you witnessed during COVID and how you're dealing with them now?
It's a great question. So we had a goal when COVID started to increase our inventory by 50%, and we had set money aside to be able to do it, and we just practically weren't able to do it for exactly the reasons you outlined. So because obviously when the COVID vaccine started coming in, nobody had planned to make hundreds of millions of vaccines, and obviously, glass vials and active ingredient, everything, and capacity went into those areas. I think it's been a real challenge to manage that, and we've had at some point active ingredient coming to us on a truck, and the company has called and said, actually, you got to turn the truck around and send it back because the government just demanded that active ingredient. So even to the point where you have active ingredient on a truck on its way to your facility, it still gets turned around and you don't get access to it. So it's been an ongoing challenge. We've had to get incredibly creative on managing that. I think kudos to our manufacturing team for doing such an amazing job. But to your point, we still are not going to be able to get to a 50% increase in inventory for at least probably another year. And because all reports from our end were, the companies that are making all the components for the COVID vaccines, it will take them 2 years to build up their infrastructure to be able to handle the capacity. So we're kind of at pretty much a year in now, so we're still probably a year away from a leveling off. Now, okay, we're back to booster doses, so we're not getting as many double doses or requirements, but we still expect for at least another year some challenges to components. We have all the components we need for the rest of the year. We have about almost all the components for everything we need next year, but it's still, some of the products that we make have a 10 to 11 month lead time. So if you don't have the components now, you're not going to have them next year. So we still see some challenges going through the next 12 months.
Just amazing how much disruption we've all witnessed through COVID.
Yes.
and still lingering. So another question has come in about FDA, and if you could answer this probably more broadly on regulatory concerns from the federal government. This question is focused on antimicrobials, but what kind of regulatory pressures in general do you see right now for your industry, and what opportunities also do you see?
Great question. So increasing pressure all the time. We're in constant dialogue with the FDA on a weekly basis, if not more often. And the pressure from the consumer groups is mounting, and we keep getting information through the FDA that there's more pressure coming. But I think what we're seeing though is very open dialogue, and I think the FDA is becoming much more engaging in some of these topics, which I think is helpful because they're also aware you can't just take something away and have no solution. So I think that there's a practical element that's growing in some of the discussions that we seem to be having with the FDA. So on the antimicrobial use, it's always being watched. It's always very visible, but I think we're seeing an increased engaging sentiment from the FDA and less draconian on what you can do, and proactive and productive timelines being provided to give many companies, including ours, opportunity to provide solutions. Now, to your point, what else is happening? I think moving into gut health and other things, I think are really evolving and accelerating to try and figure out ways to improve the immune system without other things like going to antibiotics. But I think there's still some years away before those things really play out well.
So a question that we certainly anticipate would come up with any discussion of livestock is, let's think about plant-based protein and what impact that might have on your customers going forward. I'm sure that in your whole planning discussions and strategy, this has come up. What's your viewpoint on plant-based and potential impact on the livestock industry?
So it is growing, and I see billboards for it every time I get on a highway around where I live, and which I didn't see when I was in Idaho or Kansas. But so what I would say is it's growing. When you go and talk to the supermarket chains, the reorder rate of plant-based protein is still very low. So people will go and get their steak, and they'll go and get their steak over and over again, and that's fine. But what you're seeing is the reorder rate of many plant-based proteins is still, 20% or lower, depending on the supermarket chain. So I think there's still lots of people are trying it, but the growth is still not there. It will happen over time because there's certain parts of the country that will like the concept, and it will improve. The quality will improve. The taste will improve as time goes on. And we have many wargaming activities on what it will look like. But I think it's never going to replace fully what we have today, and it will play a role. May even expand the use of protein and the sale of protein, if you call it protein. But we don't foresee in the short term it having a major impact, just because the reordering rate is still very low at the supermarket chain. So we still predict it will have an impact, but we're thinking more 5 to 10 years or beyond that time horizon.
So one of the things we've always witnessed is that as people get more disposable income, they're more likely to buy higher quality protein, more nutrient-dense protein. And this, not just in the United States, where we have those folks who are, can afford to buy anything at any price, but around the globe that historically we've seen this trend. Do you see that trend line changing at all as people are getting more disposable income and they're not going into more nutrient-dense protein in the short term?
No, it's happening. I mean, the one thing that many of us expected to see was China's a good example. It's still very heavy in pork and still very, very small amount of red meat, but still a lot of pork and poultry going in there as the middle class grows. But it's still following that same trend, absolutely. And we don't see a change in that trend at all. And things continue to go that way. And we continue to watch as things happen in Asia as the middle class grows in many of the Southeast Asian countries. So.
Another topic that's obviously always hot in U.S. agriculture is gene editing. And one of our questioners wants to know, how is Zoetis involved in gene editing, if at all? And what's the path for approval of gene editing? We've written quite a bit on this, but just if you would address the gene editing topic, we'd appreciate it.
So yes, it's a hot topic, and it's something that the approval path has been challenging and continues to be challenging, and it's always something we continue to look at. But I think the approval path is still a challenge and still somewhat of an obstacle today.
So one of the things that we always like to think about is that there are a lot of executives like you who are responsible for so many different aspects of your business. But if there's one thing that really, kind of keeps you up at night or, is the first thing you wake up with the morning, what would that be? What's at the top of your list of concerns?
I would say not so much concerns, that we've touched on a lot of it, but the two things that really that keep me up at night. The first one is, as an industry, from our perspective, for the most part, many of the diseases are under control and there's increasing generic pressure in our industry. So as a result, continued investment into an increasingly generic market is a challenge. So making sure that we still find ways to continue investment into our livestock business. When I first started in our industry, in the mid-90s, the industry was predominantly livestock. Now there's a shift to pet care. And so how do we continue to keep investment into the livestock industry at an appropriate rate that continues to bring investment? Because these methane topic that we've been talking about, labor shortages, they're really big tech topics around technology and really innovative thinking. And they're not going to be quick fixes. They're going to be long-term projects, long-term investments, and making sure that we can continue the investment in the agricultural space, to me, is going to be one of the biggest challenges. The opportunities are there. The success is known, but making sure we can continue the investment to capitalize on that is really what keeps me up at night.
I'm sure there's sometimes during COVID, you never know, the next day you get up and something else shows up on your radar screen. And obviously, we've all been watching African swine fever get a little closer to the U.S. It seems like there's additional restrictions that USDA has placed on imports of pork and pork products. Do you think, just looking broadly, now that we have a pretty good preparation plan for what could happen if African swine fever would arrive on our shores?
I would say time has been our friend, and I think we probably have a better plan than everyone that's gone before us, because it caught everybody else by surprise. I was living in Germany at the time when it hit Eastern Germany, and how it arrived, and there was literally no response. In the Netherlands, they built a wall around, or a fence, if you like, around the livestock areas to try and keep it out. So I would say our approach is by far the best so far. And I think as soon as if it does, touch wood, hopefully it doesn't hit the ground here. But if it does, then I think we'll be probably the most prepared of anyone so far. It won't be a perfect response, but I think we'll be relatively well prepared.
Well, certainly the pork industry has done a lot of things to try to get operations registered so we can regionalize any impacts and that sort of thing. So one of the things that is a little bit more creative for Zoetis is that if you look at Zoetis in the headlines now, oftentimes you see the work they've been doing to vaccinate zoo animals. It's been quite an investment in that. So I'd just be remiss if I didn't give you an opportunity to talk about how much of an interesting involvement that is.
No, thank you. And look, we created a COVID vaccine initially for dogs, because we didn't know where it was going to go, what was going to be a host animal, what not. So we thought, let's get working on it, because then we can extrapolate that as needed. And so what we've actually done is now we're over 11,000 doses of our COVID vaccine for animals with an emergency license, experimental use license that came through early, which I think is a great pathway for African swine fever vaccine, if there is one. But we've been able to vaccinate over 11,000 zoo animals around the United States across 70 zoos in 27 states, which is a great story on something that we created just in case, because we thought it may or may not be needed, but our team did an amazing job in getting ready and to keep those animals alive, and to be able to keep the livelihood of those state zoos around I think is a great thing. So I think it's been an interesting story. It's amazing how much press it picks up, but it's just something we do on the side. So.
I'm sure not a lot of media outlets come out and get excited about vaccinating a cow versus an elephant. So.
No, the apes are the big one, and the big cats are the big one. But yeah, and look, hopefully we can, with the success we've had with bringing that vaccine to market, we can do the same with ASF and see it as an opportunity in the future.
Terrific. Well, Tim, as we move closer to our close here, I'd just like you to share a little bit, if you could, any kinds of advice you might have. We have so many leaders here, both online and in the room, who are very, very invested in the livestock industry, and they'd like to see it not only survive but thrive going forward. What kinds of advice or comments could you share with our audience about what you really see as future partnerships or innovations, investments that you'd like to see from this region?
Sure, and look, something Senator Moran said I think is very, very appropriate. Agriculture matters. and agriculture matters because of what we eat every day, what we drink every day, how we go about our days. And I think the more we can help people realize and understand that, the likely we are to get continued investment. Because when you think of the amount of investment that goes on around the world every day into technology, when you think of the amount of investment that goes on around the world in all kinds of different industries, is agriculture getting its fair share? That would be the question I would ask. And how do we make sure it's able to get its fair share? So I think, the more innovative sessions and summits we can have to bring partnerships, to bring ideas, to bring new investment money into agriculture, I think will play off very well. There's lots of things that happen around the Kansas City Animal Health Corridor, which I think are a great thing in the area, and other industries. But the more we can do around bringing industry groups together, and even ones that traditionally haven't collaborated or worked together, the more we can do that, the more excitement we can generate around agriculture, the better off we'll be, because it's really going to be a funding question. It's easy to fund other things that you know more about, but how do we get, as people get more and more generations away from agriculture, how do we reintroduce them back into agriculture and the opportunities and the benefits of agriculture? So it's, but agriculture matters, and I think that's a very relevant statement.
Wonderful. Well, Tim, we want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your thoughts and your insights with us. It's been very, very helpful to our audience, and we just appreciate everything that Zoetis is doing to advance animal health.
I'm in between two great speakers, so sorry I couldn't be there with you, but it's nice to be a part of the session today, and thank you, and have a great conference.
Thank you. Let's show our appreciation for Tim.